Good morning. So glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. And I'm just so honored you use some of your Sunday morning here as we get close to lunch to worship with us, to learn together. All weekend I've been asking the services to pray for me that my voice would last. And I know you are disappointed it did. So the service isn't over. It actually worked. So we're glad you're here. Thanks so much. I've been fighting this thing all week, but we're going to get through it together. If you'd like to meet, I'd love to meet you. I'll use some Perel hand sanitizer, but we just love that when new people come to our church. I'd love the chance to say hello to you. I'm going to be in the back of this room at the Info Central at the end, and just a quick hello, get to know who you are, what brought you to our church, and would love that opportunity now or in the future, but we're glad you're here. We're talking about intentional diversity, and it's really all about this, just to make sure we're all starting on the same page. What this is all about is about you and me loving people who aren't like us. Intentional diversity is about loving people who aren't like me. It's for you to love people who aren't like you, and I hope you've been not just learning things. As we've been talking about a lot of things, and I'm talking to a lot of people in our church, like, wow, I didn't know that, and I've learned so many new things. That's great, but we got to take what we're learning and put it into practice. This whole series, really, we should keep doing until all of us are practicing it or living it out. And so how long this lasts, I guess, is up to you now until, I'm just kidding, we're a couple more weeks. But loving people who aren't like us isn't something you just think about. It's not just a decision you make. It's an action that you have to take. And the great part about it is it really benefits all of us. When you and I show love, we take action, however simple, however complex, however small, however big. When you do that for someone who's different than you, it's not necessarily you're always helping them. Really what happens is it benefits each of us. It makes an impact. So as we talk about today, this particular way to love people or who to love, I want you to think about who isn't like you. Who are people that are hard for you to love? Now, you don't have to yell it out. You don't have to point if they're here. If your spouse sitting next to you, like, no. But you can think of somebody, right? Maybe it's an individual. Maybe it's at that level. It's like it really is your spouse right now. It's hard. Maybe it's a friend or used to be a friend, somebody at your work. Universally, we all have a hard time loving our bosses. It's just the way the world is designed. We don't get that, but it's hard, right? Is it maybe a group of people, a type of person? In the life of Jesus, there's this fascinating story that I always come, I just can't get past it. It's so amazing. Jesus does one of the most scandalous things that he ever does. In Mark, if you have a Bible, you want to look at it on a maybe app on your phone or tablet. Our CCOF app has notes for your sermon as well. You can follow along a lot of different ways. But in Mark chapter 5, Jesus does this. It says he went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. I don't know when the first time you read this part of your Bible, this biography of Jesus written by Mark. Maybe you're a little kid or somebody taught you this in a Sunday school class, or maybe it's just right now. But what's interesting is we read that sentence and none of us gasp. We should have. This doesn't sound very big to you and me, but let me explain that when Mark wrote this in his biography of Jesus' life, his record and the account of what Jesus did and said and taught, when Mark wrote this down, that every single person who was from that region of the world who heard this story, who read this story, they gasp. Let me show you a picture. Let me show you a map. Maybe this will help you understand it. See, this is Israel. It actually looks the same today. It's in all the same places. Mediterranean Sea, Sea of Galilee. All the cities in red with the red lettering. Those are places that good Jews, good followers of God, people who kept the rules, who understood who God is and what God is about, that's where they went and that's where they lived, on the west side of this area. And they would travel up and forth. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. It's not on there. He grew up in Nazareth. This time as an adult, his ministry is based out of the city of Capernaum at the very top of the Sea of Galilee, where good people who follow God, who follow the rules, who were Jewish in any sense of the word, religious or just ethnicity, they didn't go over where the black lettered names are of those cities. That's the region of the Gerasenes, or as it's called even in a couple chapters later in Mark, the Decapolis. The Decapolis means 10 cities. And the 10 cities on the eastern side of the Jordan River are that's the bad part of town. Maybe you lived in a place where the other side of the tracks really meant something, or there's like that neighborhood you don't go to. That's this whole region. So when Jesus goes to the area of the Gerasenes, we should have gone, what? Like, you can't even step on the ground without being religiously impure. And that's what Jesus does. He goes there. Nobody should ever go there. That's where the Roman Empire had its headquarters. There's a legion there of 5,000 to 6,000 Roman soldiers. The center of power, the center of pagan worship, the center of everything that's the opposite of Israel and following God is in the Decapolis. So let's see what happens when he goes over here. Verse 2. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. Now, I don't know what you use the word impure spirit to describe, but sometimes, like in my life, that's like if you just chose to eat the wrong restaurant. Like you get an impure spirit. You know what I mean? We could list names, but I'd probably offend you because you like Taco Bell. But you know what I mean. This is not what that means. And I have people all the time say to me, Chris, well, people can't be possessed by demons. This is what this is saying is, you can read it in a bunch of different places. You can read it in the Greek language. It's written. A demon or a group of demons lived and controlled this man's mind and his soul and his body. And you don't have to believe in demon possession. I just know Jesus did, so I'll stick with him. Because Jesus got out of a boat, and a man with a demon that lived inside of him, that was controlling him, came to him. This is the welcome party from the Decapolis. Hey, welcome to our community. This guy's, we find out in other parts of the biographies of Jesus, he's clothing challenged, he's naked. He's got chains on him. They probably wrapped chains around his hands, his ankles, tied him to a tree or a tomb or something, trying to control this man because he's violent and he's crazy. He mutters to himself. He doesn't take care of himself. You imagine what his hair and his face and fingernails look like, and he's got chains hanging on him because he'd break the chains and go free, and he's naked, got old chains on him, unkept, living in a cemetery, because the rest of it's pretty normal, but living in a cemetery is weird. This is the welcome party for Jesus. He comes to the Decapolis, and he starts having a conversation with this man who's possessed by demons, at least one, maybe many. He says, he asks the demon, what's your name? The demon answers, Legion. Now, most of us think that's because there's a bunch of demons in there. It could just be this guy's reminding Jesus who's in charge. The Legion is in charge. It's just a few miles from here, 5,000 to 6,000 soldiers. The power of the empire was the Legion. And then they see this demon, this group of demons, whatever it is, this man that's possessing him. They see a herd of pigs, and they're like, they know Jesus, they know the power he has. They know he can cast them to hell. He could eradicate their existence. And they ask, can you send us into those pigs? This herd of animals, this herd of pigs. It's interesting imagery that the symbol of the Roman legion was a boar's head. All of their standards, their banners, much of their armor would have had a boar's head on it. It was the symbol that they had chosen in that region to represent them. Probably as a slap in the face to the Jewish people next door, to remind them where the power was, who was in charge. Jesus, for whatever reason, grants their request. Doesn't make sense to me, but he says, fine. And the demons go into the pigs, the herd of pigs. They run over a cliff, and they fall into the Sea of Galilee, which is just a big lake, and it tells us they drown. Just a quick aside, later this year in October, into the early part of November, I'm leading with my wife a pilgrimage to Israel. And we'd closed registration a few weeks ago, but we actually have a couple openings. If you're interested, talk to me afterwards. If that can work, we would need to know soon. But you can go to the place where this story happened. It's an amazing opportunity. So enough with the shameless plug. If you're interested in that, let me know. So Jesus, he heals this man. The pigs go. And here's what's amazing is there's like people who are tending those pigs and like, I don't know what, not a shepherd, but the person that watches pigs, whatever they call that, and people around, they start to hear this commotion. They go back into the town and they tell people, hey, the crazy naked guy in the cemetery is better. And people start coming out to see this. You can read it. It's all right here, John, in Mark chapter 5. It tells us that as people come from this town to see what's going on, probably the guy who owns the pig is coming to check it out too. Like, what happened to all my pigs? Like, somebody owes me some money. And it tells us the man who'd been possessed by a demon, couldn't live in town, couldn't take care of himself, chains, no clothes, is sitting there next to Jesus in his right mind, fully clothed. He got better. And the people from this town, what do you think they did? They didn't grab like some sort of chair and lift Jesus up and like celebrate and march him into town. They got scared, actually. Like, it's scary to have a guy who lives in your cemetery run around without clothes on, out of his mind, possessed by demons. Like, that's kind of scary. It's even scarier that somebody could look at that person and say one sentence and he's better. And they go, wow, that's scary. And they ask Jesus to leave. They're like, like, we can handle this kind of guy. Like, we got dozens of them, right? But you, we don't know what you're about. Jesus is on the other side of the lake. Nobody here knows. He's not trending on Twitter yet. He's not popular. The marketing campaign hasn't begun. There's no leather-bound Bibles telling you the story. You and I get it. We know the story. Jesus doesn't just have incredible power. He has incredible mercy. And on the other side of the lake, they only understand power. And it's never used with mercy. There's Jesus, get out of here. So Jesus leaves. Look at this. The end of the chapter. Jesus was getting into the boat. The man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him, which you would do too. Like, these people don't like me. They keep chaining me up. They don't get me, but you fixed me. Can I go with you? Jesus didn't let him. They said, go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. So the man went away, began to tell the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were, what's it say? They were amazed. They were scared of Jesus, and they were amazed at this man and his story. And sometimes when I read this story, I think, man, I wish I could do what Jesus did. I wish I had that kind of power. I wish I had the ability to just say something to a person who's tormented or even in this exact situation, somebody's just, their life is broken. I could just say a word and it would be better. I think, I can't do that. And maybe you look at that story and you think, I can't do what Jesus did. And you have to do what I need to do often is remember, I'm not Jesus in the story. I'm the other guy. And you're the other guy. And maybe that dramatic of a life has never been the one you lived. Maybe it has been. What Jesus asked the other guy, what he asked the person who was healed, who was the recipient of love and mercy, was to simply share that story with the people around him. Jesus doesn't ask you and I to do what he did in this setting. But I believe he's asking us to do what the demon-possessed man did. Trust him, and then tell that story. He asks us to show love in ways that we can. Just like he asked this man to show love to the people around him. So Jesus goes back to the other side. We don't know what happens. It just tells us that this man, the demon-possessed man, the demoniac as he's called sometimes, goes around the Decapolis telling people what Jesus has done and that it's amazing to people. And then here's what's great. Jesus comes back Look at this. Mark chapter 7, verse 31. Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre and went through Sidon. This is where good Jewish people are supposed to go, these places. He's back on the right side of the lake, the proper side of the tracks, down to the Sea of Galilee, and he does it again, into the region of the Decapolis. Jesus' followers, like the disciples, I sure wish we could hear what like Peter says right here. Jesus, that didn't go well. Why are we going back over there? Don't you remember that crazy guy? Just like, yeah. Let's see what he's been up to. And remember, when Jesus shows up the first time, one person came to see him. He only encountered one person. And this time, if you read the rest of Mark chapter 7 in your Bible, you listen to it on your app, what you'll hear is a story. When Jesus shows back up, crowds arrive. It starts with they bring a man who's deaf and he can't hear, and they go, Jesus, can you heal this guy? It's like, wait, last time I was here, you asked me to leave. And we think it's probably just a few months, not a very long period of time. He comes in, and there's people coming, and they're asking him to come in all their towns and villages, and they want their friends, the people who are struggling, people who need healing, to experience Jesus and experience wholeness, restoration. So Jesus, he starts to do that in the very place he'd just been asked to leave. You can read all about it. And then it says this in Mark chapter 8, beginning this. It says, during those days, during this time in the Decapolis, in these cities and villages, another large crowd gathered. So not the first time. A totally different reception. And since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. Now let's be honest. If we said, I'm going to be up here and we're going to teach for 3 days and you don't get any food, guess how many people will be here with me? Me. And I'll just call that like fasting. 3 days, listening to Jesus, nothing to eat. After just a couple months ago saying, get out of here. We don't understand you. This doesn't make any sense. But Jesus' followers, his disciples, see, they understand what's happening here. Because back on the right side of the lake, just a little while ago, same exact situation unfolds. And Jesus is like, hey, anybody have any food? And these guys are like, there's not enough food, we don't have enough money. And they grumble and gripe, and they find a boy at the lunch. Jesus, and now they're going, wait a second. This is familiar. Go find some food. So they go in the crowd, and 7 people are willing to give up a loaf of bread. They're like, no, watch this. Jesus has this cool trick he does with bread. Let me have some. So Jesus, it tells the Mark, they give him 7 loaves of bread. Interesting. They find a few fish, it tells us, and Jesus does the exact same thing he did on the right side of the lake where the good people live. He blesses the bread, he breaks it, he starts to hand it out, and this is where the Thaddeus and Bartholomew, the cool disciples are like, watch this, kid. And thousands of people who've been with Jesus for 3 days, they ran out of food long ago. They all eat. It says they all eat till they're full. It tells us there are 4,000 men in the crowd. We don't know how many women, how many kids. 4,000, maybe a crowd 3 times that big. They eat. And all the disciples are like, this is awesome. We got to keep this one up. Like, we could start a business. And Jesus like, hey, remember what we do at the end of this? Yeah, they get the baskets. They start collecting all the leftovers. This time, they have 7 baskets of leftovers. See, the first time on the good side, where the people who follow God live, they collected 12 baskets of leftovers. And everyone who was there, who knew that number, everybody who ever read this biography of Jesus, that lived at that time, who understands the old covenant, would have said, oh, that 12, that number 12, it represents God's 12 tribes. And that same exact group of people would have recognized the number 7. That Jesus took 7 loaves and fed a crowd in the Decapolis. And they picked up 7 basketfuls of leftovers. See, that number 7 at the time in that region represented the 7 nations of Canaan who used to live where the 12 tribes now live. In the book of Joshua and Judges, in your Old Testament, the Old Covenant, part of your Bible, it tells the story of groups of people named the Canaanites and the Hittites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, and a few others, 7 total, that lived in that promised land, that lived on the right side of the lake. And God pushed out ahead of his people through war, through all kinds of just miraculous things to the other side. And their descendants live in the Decapolis. Jesus is bringing food. Jesus calls himself the bread of life. He's feeding the people on the other side of the lake. The people that God at one point didn't want in his land. Some people thought God had cursed. Now God is showing up and giving them hope and healing in the gospel. This, my friends, is intentional diversity at its core. And it all happened when Jesus healed one man who told his story to his people. Pastor and author John Ortberg, he says it this way in a book he's written. It says, it's almost as if Jesus is saying, good news is coming for the 12 tribes, but good news is coming for the 7 nations of Canaan too. 12 tribes, 7 nations. It doesn't really matter to us, to Jesus. I love them all. It's good news for this side, and it's good news for the other side. Because see, all of us have people who are hard to love. There was nobody harder to love in the time of Jesus than the people on the other side of that lake. Who's on the other side of your lake? Who's the person that you just can't forgive? You can't show love to? Who's that type of person? Who's that group of people that you're just tired of it? Whatever it is. Who's on the other side of the lake from you? Who is hard for you to love? Is this someone who's hurt you? Is this someone who betrayed you? Is this somebody who cost you your job or your career? Somebody broke your heart? Some of us, it's people who've been abusive, they've hurt us. Some of us, they just post nasty things on Facebook and we think it's the end of the world, and it feels like it is. You still hate that coach who cut your kid from the team or wouldn't let them play shortstop because his kid was playing shortstop the whole year? Or you're the coach and you're like these parents. And I think about school teachers right now. You're almost there. You know, you've got a kid or a parent. It's just hard to love them. There's somebody for all of us, and for some of us, it's a whole group of people. We just put them in the stereotype, and we go, they're on the other side of the lake. All the good people over here. Maybe it's for you. Maybe it's folks in downtown who are homeless or aggressive and ask you for help, or those people sitting at every on-ramp and off-ramp in town with a sign. Some of them are witty. I appreciate the humor on occasion, but do you ever look at those people and say, whatever you say? Do you have an enemy? Don't raise your hand. Some of us, we have people that they're enemies. We don't even call them like hard to love. We're just like, no, they're my enemy. Like I'm against them. They've earned their way on the enemy list. I know. Right? They deserve to be there. Who's hard to love for you? You know, it's Jesus who said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. John Ortberg has another quote. I think this is amazing. He says, love of enemies is perhaps Jesus' teaching that is the most famous and violated. Right? You know that, right? Like nobody ever said, love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. Nobody in history, philosophy, politics, for centuries even after the time of Jesus, except quoting Jesus, would anybody ever say this? And how many of us violate it? Who's hard to love? Friends, this is our opportunity. Not to just agree to something. Not to just change our mind and say, yeah, I should do that. But to practice loving people who aren't like us, including people who are hard to love. This is our opportunity. Because when Jesus did that for one man who was out of his mind, who was scary, he wasn't healthy. And that one man's story of receiving love from someone who wasn't like him at all changed thousands of lives. Gave thousands of people the opportunity to hear the good news. So how do we do that? It's not enough to just think we should. How? It's always three ways. You know that, right? Because I can't think of four ever. I want you to think about one of these three very practical things. How do you show love to people who aren't like you, who are hard to love? The first one is this, and this is going to be a little counterintuitive, so hang with me. I think the first step to showing love to people who are hard to love is you have to put proper boundaries around harmful and abusive people. Excuse me. Some of us, the people that are hard to love are really, they're bad to us. And I don't just mean people who disagree with your choice of clothing style, or they don't like the same kind of music as you, or they're, one political thing and you're another political thing. No. Those people aren't harmful. I'm talking about people who are harmful, who are abusive. For some of us, we're trying to love somebody in the middle of them abusing us, taking advantage of us, of hurting us. And friends, you can't do that. See, to love someone is not put yourself back in a situation that isn't safe. That isn't safe emotionally, isn't safe physically. That's not what we're talking about when we say loving people who are hard to love. The very best resource I could point you to is a book written many, many years ago by Dr. Henry Cloud called Boundaries. It should be easy to remember if you want to go home and search for it. If you have our app, which if you're cool, you have our app, just a side note. In the sermon resources, there's a section called sermon resources. The very top two resources there are a link to this, or a description of this book, so you can remember it, and some other things that Dr. Cloud has now, an online community talking about this issue. It's really, really beneficial stuff to many of us. But you can't show love to people who are actively hurting you until you put a boundary in place. And to put a boundary in place is not to deny love. It just limits that person's ability to harm you. And for some of us, this is what we need to do. It's necessary, and you're probably going to need help, not just a book. But it's what some of us have to start with. It also means that you at times, people are harmful and abusive to themselves. And it's putting a boundary around them where they can't keep hurting themselves in whatever way that's taking shape. Friends, this is something very, very close to home for me. I have a family member that our family here has had to put a very hard boundary around. And our interaction is very limited. And that person takes it as we don't love them, we don't forgive them, but the abuse that they brought, the harm that they're causing wasn't ending, and they weren't taking any reasonable steps for it to change. And so we had to put a boundary because they weren't willing to take the steps offered to them for health and restoration to stop the harm that was coming. So I get this. It's not easy. It's very difficult, but it's necessary. And actually, with that boundary, it's easier for us to love this person, to forgive them. Because we don't love them when we allow them to harm themselves or us. And often the best help for somebody who is harmful isn't to give them what they ask for. I talked about people who ask for money, ask for help, people who are on the on-ramps and off-ramps. We all see it, and every time I'm sitting at the off-ramp coming to work, almost every time I see somebody hand somebody money to those folks. And friends, I just want you to think about the best thing you can do for someone is not usually what they're asking you to do. If you talk to people who are in social services in our community, who work in our law enforcement, people who work in the fire department, who have to answer calls to deal with situations with groups of people like this, the vast majority will tell you, every one of them will tell you that the vast majority of that money you and I give out our windows is being used to buy drugs and alcohol. This is where you could put a boundary. See, in our family, we have compassion. We want to help people. So what we decided, instead of, I'm not handing out cash, is I support what our church does. I mean, my wife and I, we give more than a tithe. So that allows our church more money to support places like the Rescue Mission and the food bank. We were having this conversation a few days ago on our staff, and Annie Brown was saying, well, you know what I did is I made a card up. And I hand this out to people. I'm like, what? You did what? She has a card. And I said, can we borrow that? She's like, what, you need to go to the food bank? I'm like, no, I know where the food center is. So this is the front and back of a business card that she put together. And I said, can we borrow that? We want to make a bunch. So we have hundreds of these that we made for you. Because maybe the boundary to show someone love is to tell them where they can get a place to stay. I know all of these people, as I've talked to them on our streets and on those intersections, they all have a phone, or one of them in their crew has a phone, so they'll be able to call and get there. The Flagstaff Family Food Center serves 2 hot meals a day. Maybe you don't know that. I often offer rides to people. Hey, you want to go to the food center? It's lunchtime. I'll eat lunch with you there. They're like, no. Sometimes. I've given people rides to the Mission, Front Door Catholic Charities. These are all things that when you support our church financially, you're supporting these places. Every single one of them, we help. So instead of handing out money, I'm taking a bunch of these cards home. I'm stealing Annie's cards. I'm going to keep supporting our church so we can keep supporting these places. Friends, we have to have compassion. And I don't roll on my window and say snarky things or, mean things. Don't do that either. That's not love. Love is helping someone. And you have to start by putting a boundary around people, whether they're hurting you or they're hurting themselves. So just an example, here's 2 more things you can do. You can read, I would ask you to read Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7 every day for a month. Now, if you don't read your Bible all the time, hang with me. Here's the thing about love and loving people who aren't like us. It's not about the information. See, in the middle of that, in Matthew chapter 6 is where Jesus said, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. I learned that probably about 9 years old in a Sunday school class in a small little church in Oklahoma. It doesn't make it easier to know it. I mean, I've known it, I've read it, I've seen it. What makes it easier to do it is feeling it and understanding it. And what I've just watched happen in my life over and over again is if I take something like this, small and intentional, and just reapply it and reinforce it, if you would do that for a month, you might start to see yourself loving people who aren't like you better. Not just thinking about it, but doing it. I know it's hard, and some of you are like, I don't really like reading, that's not my thing. That's cool. Download the Bible app, YouVersion. It will read it out loud to you. You can listen to it in your headphones, whatever, driving to work, or every day for a month. Because if you have a hard time loving people who aren't like you, and you're like, I don't want to do that. That's the point. You need to do this. I dare you to do this. Do it for a month, see what happens. If it doesn't work, call me, I'll give you your money back. Last thing, change the way you pray. Man, I often find myself with somebody in my life, my kids or my wife or like somebody, whatever, I'm having a hard time with relationally. I default praying, God, fix them. Like, make them stop that. Or if you're really holy, you're like, God, give me the patience to endure. Right? Like, that's what holy people pray. I quit praying that prayer because I'm not very holy. I just started doing this one. God, would you bring your best for them? Whatever that is. If it's a person, it's your enemy, it's a group of people, it's your spouse, your kids, your parents, your boss. Oh my goodness. If you would pray that for your boss, the economy of this town would be through the roof. God, bring your best for my boss. They drive me nuts. but I want your best for them. Because God's best for your boss, for your spouse, for those people on the other side of the lake, God's best is better than anything you can think of. It's better than them changing the way you want them to change. And maybe it helps you too. Maybe God's best for your boss is they get a promotion and move. You're like, sweet, new boss. Thank you, God. They're happy, I'm happy. Change the way you pray. Read God's word in repetition. Put a proper boundary around people who aren't helping, who are harmful. And remember this last thing. No matter what, no matter which side of the lake you are on or you come from, Jesus is for you. It's not your fault you grew up great and everything's awesome and your life's perfect. You've always followed Jesus. You're on the right side of the lake. And it's not your fault you're on the other side of the lake. And you've never heard of any of this, and you have this story and this baggage, and it doesn't matter which side you're on. Jesus has been to your side. He brought a miracle. He brought healing. He brought food. He brought his gospel. And he asks us to share him with people on the other side of the lake. No matter who they are. No matter who we are. Jesus is for us. And he's for us loving those people who are hard. So we're going to pray and ask him to help us. God, we're so grateful that no matter which side of this lake of life that we find ourselves on, and we feel like we've got such blessings and everything together, or we're a total disaster right now. Or we've known you from the beginning, or we're kind of just now exploring it. You're there. And that through Jesus, you've been there. You feed us. You take the story of one man who was out of his mind and changed the lives of thousands for you. We want to be used like that. We want to experience that. God, help us live our lives for the sake of others. Help us live our life loving people who aren't like us, and specifically those people right now. In whatever context, in whatever way, it's hard to love. God, help us love them. Not for our sake, but for their sake. Because maybe through that act of love and a change in us, they could see you. God, we truly want to live our life for the sake of this world. We ask for your help.